Regarding the test levels, ISTQB defines the test stages of the V model as the test levels for the base categorization. This provides an indication of the focus of the testing and the types of problems it is likely to uncover. Typical tests include unit testing, integration testing, system testing, and acceptance testing. Unit testing is the testing of individual software components. A unit is a minimal software item that can be tested in isolation. Component testing is the lowest level of testing. It refers to the testing of the smallest items, the building blocks of the system, the units. Systems are likely to consist of many components, and their creation is likely to be the responsibility of several programmers. Component testing is concerned with testing an individual component that is normally carried out initially by the programmer who created it. Unit testing, also known as component, module, or program testing, searches for defects in and verifies the functioning of software modules, programs, objects, classes, etc. that are separately testable. It's intended to ensure that the code written for the unit meets its specification, and this should happen prior to its integration with other units. It may be carried out in isolation from the rest of the system. We can use stubs, drivers, and simulators. ISTQB defines stubs, drivers, and simulators like this. A stub is a skeletal or special purpose implementation of a software component used to develop or test a component that calls or is otherwise dependent on it. It replaces a called component. A driver is a software component or test tool that replaces a component that takes care of the control and or the calling of a component or system. A simulator is a device, a computer program or system used during testing, which behaves or operates like a given system when provided with a set of controlled inputs. Unit testing may include testing of functionality to ensure that the correct format screen, for instance, is displayed, that the customer record is added correctly, or that reports are produced in the correct format. Testing specific non-functional characteristics, for instance, to search for memory leaks, or to test whether the unit functions correctly validate inputs that are entered. And finally, structural testing is, for instance, a statement or decision coverage test. Unit testing typically occurs with access to the code that is being tested and with the support of a unit test framework. Unit testing usually involves a programmer who wrote the code. A rather common and well-known approach to unit testing is the test-first approach or test-driven development, TDD. TDD is where functional tests are written first and code is then created and tested. It is worked until it passes the tests. We have the preparation of test cases occurring right before the code is written. This is a highly interactive approach based on cycles of developing test cases, then building and integrating small pieces of code and executing the unit tests until they pass. So going from red to green and then doing some refactoring. Once unit tests have been written, the next stage is to put them together to create the system. This is called integration. It is concerned with bringing individual components together to test them as a whole. Individual components may work very well on their own, but you need to check the interfaces and interaction between them. Through component integration testing, we start assembling components into subsystems. We can then integrate the subsystems together to create the overall system being delivered. Integration testing focuses on interfaces between components, interactions with different parts of the system, for instance, the operating system, the file system, and hardware, and interfaces between systems. Unit integration testing tests the interactions between software units and is done after unit testing. Is the information being passed in the correct order between the different components? Is each item of data in the correct format? Are the correct number of items being passed? System integration testing tests those interactions between different systems or between hardware and software and may be done after system testing also. In order to ease fault isolation and detect defects early, integration should normally be incremental rather than a big bang. The idea is to reduce the risk of late defect discovery, as we've seen already. It makes it easier to isolate faults and detect defects early, and it starts the integration process as early as possible. An incremental approach may be based on the system architecture, such as a top-down or a bottom-up approach. With top-down approach, you start from the top level of the component hierarchy. Stubs are used to simulate any components that the top level calls. This continues down each level until all the components have been introduced and no more stubs are needed. With the bottom-up approach, the lowest level components, so they are then used to facilitate the testing of higher level components. Drivers are used to simulate the higher level components that might not yet have been written. System testing is concerned with testing all functionality and end-to-end processes as defined for the system under test. It encompasses non-functional testing, where everything that doesn't relate to functionality of the system is tested. Non-functional testing covers aspects such as ease of use and performance. The system may provide all the necessary functionality, but if it is not easy to use or does not perform very well, then it will not be fit for purpose. The test environment should correspond to the final target or production environment as much as possible. We run the risk that when we do move to the production environment, problems are encountered. By ensuring that the system will be tested as it will be used in the live environment, we are minimizing the risk of environment-specific failures not being found in testing. System testing is often the largest phase of testing carried out, and it is frequently the first stage of testing where independent test teams become involved. The benefit of this independence is that an objective assessment of the system can be made based on the specifications as written and not the code. The functional requirements provide detail on what the application being developed will do. For testing of functional requirements, testers should select the most appropriate specification-based techniques, black box techniques. For instance, a decision table may be created for combinations of effects described in business rules. Regarding non-functional system testing, it's to look at those aspects that are important but not directly related to what functions the system performs. These tend to be generic requirements which can be applied to many different systems. Examples of non-functional requirements include maintainability, ability to introduce changes to the system, performance, expected normal behavior, load handling, behavior of the system under increasing load, stress handling, behavior at the upper limits of system capability, and usability, the ease with which users can engage with the system. Acceptance testing is the final phase of testing as depicted on the V model. Those responsible for acceptance testing need to ensure that the system is suitable for moving into the production environment. They need to ensure that it does satisfy requirements. Also, if there are any outstanding defects or untested risks, they need to be satisfied that the system can be implemented with these issues outstanding and that an agreed course of action to address these areas is in place. Customers or potential users of the system may carry out acceptance testing, or it may be the responsibility of independent acceptance test teams within the business community. Acceptance testing is thus the formal with respect to user needs, requirements, and business processes conducted to determine whether or not a system satisfies the acceptance criteria and to enable the user, customers, or other authorized entity to determine whether or not to accept the system. It is often the responsibility of the customers or users of the system. The goal in acceptance testing is to establish confidence in the system, parts of the system, or specific non-functional characteristics of the system. The main focus of acceptance testing is to assess the system's readiness for deployment and use. While finding defects is still possible, it is not the main focus in acceptance testing. Basically, it's the time where you have to say go, no go, yes or no, regarding specific functionalities of the system or the entire system to be deployed. Typical forms of acceptance testing include user acceptance testing, that verifies the fitness for use of the system by business users, operational acceptance testing, where testing of backup, restore, disaster recovery, user management, maintenance tasks, data load and migration tasks, periodic checks of security vulnerabilities happen. Contract and regulation acceptance testing. Contract acceptance testing is performed against the contract's acceptance criteria for producing custom-developed software. Acceptance criteria should be defined when the parties agree to the contract and included in the contract, and could be carried out by a third party or by an independent test team in the business rather than IT area, and is performed against any regulations that must be adhered to. We have to test to show compliance. Ignorance is not a defense. Alpha and beta testing enables developers to get feedback from potential or existing customers before the software product is put on sale commercial. Alpha testing is performed at developing organization's site, but not by the developing team. Testing is done by customers or potential customers. Beta testing or field testing is performed by customers or potential customers at their own locations. Organizations may use other terms as well, such as factory acceptance testing and site acceptance testing for systems that are tested before and after being moved to a customer site. This is all included in acceptance testing in its several forms.